Welcome to That Business Show 2.0. I'm your host, Jamie Maloney, where business becomes show business. Today, we're going to be talking about human resources with our guest, Ariana Robinson Danquah. She is the president and founder of Workspace Lab, and you can learn more throughout the discussion at the website workspacelab.org. And this is a nonprofit organization that she has formed to help both employees and employers with HR questions. And so, Ariana, welcome to the program today.
Thanks, Jamie. Glad to be here.
So first off, tell us about the mission and vision and why you started Workspace Lab.
Yeah, so Workplace Lab is sort of something that I birthed out of an inner passion. I've been working in research and academic research and industry for over a decade now, and I'm constantly surprised by the kinds of questions that I get from employees, friends, small business owners in particular who don't necessarily have the funds to go for a full service HR department. And typically I find that their questions are pretty, what I would say, basic questions, where they don't necessarily feel like they have an advocate or an ally inherent within whatever it is they're doing, and they just want a real practical solution to whatever issue or dilemma they're grappling with.
Yeah, let's talk about, from an employer's standpoint first. A lot of people listen to this program are solopreneurs. They may have an employee or two, and obviously they're not going to have an HR department. But for just that small business owner who's going to make that first hire, what should they know up front to protect themselves from, traditional HR claims? I know, like the Form I-9 that they got to get filled out. There's just some stuff that I know a lot of small business owners don't know.
Yeah, no, that's a perfect question. So again, Workplace Lab is an employee advocacy, employee empowerment nonprofit. And so we don't necessarily venture into the legality of employing individuals so much, but we can certainly offer tips and tricks and practical advice for solopreneurs, small business owners, and try to be proactive when they're engaging with, others to employ in their organization. I think around the legality, those are pretty simple, in my opinion, because you can Google up, sort of what are some of the steps, especially if you're employing less than 5 or 10 people. It's pretty quick and easy to get off the ground as long as you can find people who you can trust and rely on. Where Workplace Lab comes in, and certainly my expertise, is around some of those softer elements. How do you make sure that you're getting somebody that you can trust? How do you make sure that you're getting somebody who's loyal? How do you keep them engaged? And vice versa. So you've seen it, Jamie, tons and tons of books and ebooks and materials around being a great leader. Where Workplace Lab comes in is shifting that paradigm in terms of how do I be an empowered employee? How do I really bring my best self to work? And how do I make sure that my organization is being transparent with me? Okay,
so let's talk about that. First off, what was the inspiration for this organization? Again, this is a nonprofit that you have recently founded. I know you have a lot of experience in HR, human resources, but what was the inspiration behind this?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. I think when you sit in industry for a certain number of years, you kind of come up against some of the same types of issues. As an HR professional, there's a couple of things. The perception of HR professionals can be rather negative, and I think we've seen it in the news most recently in the last year or two, scandals at Uber and Fox News and other organizations where you're seeing the employees don't necessarily feel empowered, and so things happen, things go wrong. It doesn't have to be as tawdry as sexual harassment per se, but there's things that happen in organizations on an ongoing basis. And so when I realized that both my experience and things that I saw just hitting, the national headlines really came together to say, what is HR doing? How do we make sure that people feel like, yes, HR is protecting the organization, but also HR professionals can be employee advocates and empower people? That's really where Workplace Lab was birthed out of, is this notion of employees should feel like they can show up to work, be their best selves, have a transparent conversation with their employer, and really get the best out of the work relationship. So that's really where Workplace Lab comes in, and it changes the paradigm a bit. It changes the power dynamic a bit, but I think it's really important.
The culture around, our careers has changed so much over the last couple of generations. And in generations past, people, went to school, they got an education, and they went to a job for 40 years. Today, that's not the mindset, and I think this speaks to the trust issue between employer and employee, that people go to school now and they have the the mentality that they're going to be at this job for 3 years, and then the next job they're going to have 5 or 6 different careers. I think that impacts that trust between employer and employee. How would you say the shifting cultures is impacting this today?
Absolutely. I think that's a really profound insight, Jamie, because certainly we're seeing individuals, they get tons of education, graduate degrees, they move into the workforce, and they intend to stay at organizations, pick up certain skills, pick up certain experiences, and then leverage those to move across industry sometimes, or certainly move up the corporate ladder, as it were. The gig economy is really big right now. That's kind of a buzzword, having different, using your expertise to have freelance jobs and do different things, and work at your own pace and build your own expertise, become an influencer. So we've certainly seen that the work culture has changed, and I think it's for the better, to be perfectly frank. I mean, yes, there's organizations that exist out there, more conservative organizations that intend to recruit you, really want to invest in you. The cost of hiring individuals is not cheap. And so it's not a low threshold by any means. And if you invest a lot of time and energy in education, resources and development, these sorts of things to make sure that they're effective at what they do. But really, it's an employee's market these days. And so again, Workplace Lab, I was really passionate about founding it as a nonprofit for this reason, to give people, a place to go, a confidant, as it were, to help them navigate the terrain in the global marketplace. People are moving around. They don't always know who they can trust with certain dilemmas and issues that pop up. And so that's the niche and that's the gap that Workplace Lab is trying to fill. And
trust is such an important component of any relationship, not to mention, the employer-employee relationship. So what are some things that like an employee can do to help, show and build trust between an employer, especially, like I said, in today's, culture where the employer's looking at somebody thinking, they're probably only going to be here a year if I hire them. What can they do?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a popular equation out there called the trust equation, and I certainly subscribe to it. We've just recently done, a series around trust on our blog and via our podcast as well, Jamie. And so trust to me is a huge, huge deal. And so for all the reasons we've just talked about, to me, trust is primarily made up of a number of things, right? So credibility. Are you credible? Do you say what you're going to do? Do you do what you're going to do? And then are you showing and proving that you're there and you're ready to work? And that's on both sides, right? So you can't just do that as an employee, but you also need to do that as an employer, and that's really important. Combine that with reliability. Are you reliable? So are you not only credible and competent, but can people rely on you? That's super important. Finally, I think there's a bit around intimacy. This isn't a tawdry word. It's not meant in a romantic sense, of course, but it's meant around, being intimate, being vulnerable, being authentic, and being your truest self. That's really important. And so authenticity has had sort of a reawakening in recent years. There's been a lot of TED Talks and literature around being authentic, what that looks like, how do you be an authentic leader, and I think that's really the main thrust of the equation. And then you put that over the denominator of self-orientation. You want that to be very low. Again, this is the trust equation. I didn't come up with this, but Charles Green is a purveyor in this field. So you put credibility, reliability, intimacy over a low self-orientation, and to me that builds trustworthiness on both sides, which is very important. You need organizational trust, you need individual or micro trust. And so those elements I think are vitally important to trust.
Okay, and so as you're developing, whether it's you're coming in for an initial interview or you're looking to climb the corporate ladder, those are the things that you need to kind of, I guess, hint at, throughout the discussion and throughout your employment to show your employer that, listen, I'm credible, I'm reliable, I'm intimate, as you described it. Those will help you then get into the positions that you want to get in. Am I correct?
Absolutely, yeah. And again, all of those elements should be the most that they can be. You need to be authentic to yourself. You need to be reliable. You need to be credible. But then there's this element around self-orientation, and that element, Jamie, is actually quite vitally important, right? So you can be all those things, but if everything you're going after, whether it be from the employer side or the employee side, is for yourself, people are going to see through that really quickly. Adam Grant's work around givers and takers is a prominent example, right? So he's getting a lot of press right now around givers and takers. People can see through takers so quickly, but if you are able to give with a low self-orientation and you have kind of that team first, enterprise first mentality, I think that'll get you really far.
Now, I hear a lot of people that start nonprofits. It's a goal of many people that I know. How are you marketing this to the community? How are you getting the word out there? I know you have a podcast going on podcasts, but just like with any business, how are you spreading the word on this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And certainly having just launched earlier this year, it's one that we're continuing to grapple with. And so primarily online and social media, and certainly myself and my board get out when we can to local events, national events, to help really broadcast what Workplace Lab is here to do. We're here to bring a service to the community that we feel is a gap, and so that's really important to us. But you yourself know, Jamie, that we work in a global marketplace, right? So online, people can find whatever it is they're after. And so we're using that to our advantage as well by social media and our blog and our podcast. So we're so thankful to have listeners and people who are interested in what we're doing from pretty much every major continent, Australia, the UK, different parts of Latin America, Africa. We've had quite a lot of visitors from all over the world, which is really encouraging.
So this is an international brand that people can take advantage of through your website, through your phone, through the podcast. Does it cater more towards the employee or employer or the HR professional, or can everybody attain value from this?
Absolutely. I would say that primarily our target audience is anybody in industry, whether they're a mid-level manager, individual contributor, small business owner. That's really our main focus, but everybody can benefit from that. And we really strive to aim our services at leaders, small business owners, and individual contributors across the world.
Currently talking to Ariana Robinson Danquah. She is the president and founder of Workspace Lab, a nonprofit human resources organization where you can come to her for guidance and assistance. Learn more at workplacelab.org. Also on her website, she has a podcast, and you can find some more information out on her podcast as well. Stay tuned. We got more from her when we come back from the break on That Business Show 2.0 with your host, Jamie Maloney, where business becomes show business. Welcome back to That Business Show 2.0 with your host, Jamie Maloney, where business becomes show business. New episodes each weekday morning, 9 a.m. on thatbusinessnetwork.com. And please find us on iTunes and on YouTube and subscribe each and every weekday morning. We talk with different business owners, entrepreneurs, political and community leaders about their businesses, their challenges, and their successes. If you'd like to appear on the program, go to tbsinterview.com for more information. My guest today is Ariana Robinson Danquah, president and founder of Workplace Lab. Learn more at that website, workplacelab.org. And it's a nonprofit organization that works with people in the HR area. If there's something that you just may not feel right about, something that you just need some guidance on in human resources, it can be a resource for you as an employee and also as an employer as well. Again, workplacelab.org. So Ariana, let's talk a little bit about how employers are using social media against people today. Employees are, going in for a job interview, and how much is what they're putting out there online being used against them? And do employees or employers even need to tell the employee that, hey, I viewed your Facebook and I didn't really, think that you're a fit because of this, this, and this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a really interesting phenomenon now, right? So everybody, essentially, if they've got a social media account, is discoverable on the web. And so my go-to advice to people is really be mindful as to what you're putting out there. Even if you want to live your most authentic and truest life in social media so that your friends and your family can be attuned to what you're doing, just make sure you set your privacy filters at the very least. I've come across scenarios where, unfortunately, people have told their employer one thing and a very different story was portrayed online, and coworkers will come across it because nowadays a lot of people aren't really shy about friending their coworkers on Facebook or Twitter or these other things. The only real professional network that I think exists out there, and this won't be a surprise to anyone, is LinkedIn. That's really where professional networking should happen. If you have the inclination to add your friends on Facebook and Twitter and other sort of casual mediums for social media, I would say just be mindful of what you're putting out there, the impression that it could create, and the fact that it's always going to be discoverable online, depending on how your privacy filters are set up. Now, to your second sort of more provocative question is, how does this impact the employer-employee relationship? It could vary, right? So depending on the size of the organization, how the information is found out, I mean, there aren't a ton of rights protecting social media accounts on either side. And so on both sides, you might have conservative organizations or organizations that might be a little less apt to mention that they saw something on social media, whereas maybe small organizations or organizations that don't really have a lot of infrastructure or what am I trying to say? They don't have a lot of barriers. We'll say, hey, we saw this on social media. We don't like it. You need to remove it. So it really depends on that employer-employee relationship. But I would always say, protect yourself, protect your privacy. I'm certainly a fan of using LinkedIn in the professional sense. If you like Facebook, Twitter, these other ones, go at it, but just be mindful of the fact that it's discoverable, and your employer might not necessarily come forward and say, hey, we saw this, but it can certainly impact the relationship in many ways.
It's been years since I've been in a job market, looking for a job. And I remember, 20 years ago when I was, out of school, and the industry standard at that time was monster.com to find a job. But more and more today, I hear about LinkedIn. I mean, so people, even at a young age, need to be coached on setting up a LinkedIn profile, beginning to build community and presenting themselves professionally, because that can really impact your career, can it not?
Absolutely. No, LinkedIn is huge. And I know there's a number of consultants who are, getting clients like gangbusters, really just trying to help people set up their personal brand via avenues like LinkedIn and making sure that their social media presence is always where it should be. I mean, there are certain things that you really want to keep in mind for your LinkedIn profile, right? Make sure it's professional. I read recently, from a consultant in this area, that it's really important to get a specific URL that helps people to identify you. Make sure your education's up to date. Don't necessarily feel the need to talk in third person. Now that there's over almost, I think, 500 million users on LinkedIn, I mean, really try to present yourself in the most professional way. And there are a ton of companies that use it to recruit folks. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think this really speaks to the idea of personal branding, an idea that, a couple of generations ago, nobody talked about you as a brand, but more and more today with the use of, online as in employment, and these profiles that people have, really employees or employers can look at somebody as a brand by how they present themselves. And so I really think that we need to begin coaching people on understanding that they are a brand, whether they're going to be a business owner or work for somebody else. You have an identity in your employer's eyes if you have any type of online presence. How would you say?
I would absolutely agree with that, 100%. We are all our own brand. And it really is this particular image or an impression that you create that you leave people with, right? So I've done different things with different communities of people to say, what is your personal brand? Just asking this question, what is your personal brand? Are you aware of it? Have you asked individuals in your own network how they view you, how you're seen, what people feel like after they interact with you? Because it is sort of this intangible thing, right? So really, I think it's vitally important, especially if you're cognizant of wanting to climb up through the ranks, as it were, in industry. Ask yourself, what is my personal brand? How does my organization see me? If you don't know, ask. Your manager, people at that peer level, your friends, your family, they're all going to be able to give you particular adjectives that they would associate with you. Do you like those adjectives? How do you change those descriptors if you don't like them, right? So really be very conscientious about the impression that you're leaving with others, because that essentially is your personal brand.
Absolutely. And personal brand is also going to lead to your ability to advance in the workplace, as an employee. Let's talk about advancement and negotiations from an employee standpoint. How should one, approach, the idea of, asking for an promotion in the workplace? How can Workplace Lab also come into play in this area?
Yeah, absolutely. We've done a couple of different features on negotiation, and I constantly find that it's a really nerve-wracking kind of encounter to people. And I try to tell them, listen, don't feel scared about negotiating for what you think you're worth. And certainly as entrepreneurs, a ton of your audience are entrepreneurs like myself and like yourself, Jamie, and they know you have to be able to set certain price points for yourself in order to evaluate who you are and to get paid, right? So think of yourself again as a brand, even if you're working for somebody else. One of the things that I like to tell people is starting from a place of partnership, right? And so don't always assume that it's a zero-sum game. Assume good intent, as they say, and really start out from a place of saying, okay, well, I know who I am, I know what I've contributed, and that's why I want to have this conversation with you. I really think it's time that we talk about my compensation and just let it be an organic conversation, right? So it's vitally important that you know who you are and really what the story is behind your strength. I know you've had some guests on in the past in the recent history that talked about storytelling. Very, very impactful, right? So knowing your own story, knowing what it is that you contribute, your own strengths, I think that's vitally important to that negotiation conversation as well. You should be aware of how it plays in terms of the timing, right? So if you work for an organization that has annual pay reviews or annual performance reviews, that's probably a great time to talk about it. If you don't work for an organization that is as structured, it might be a little bit harder to time it, quote unquote, appropriately, but just make sure that you are aware of the things that your manager or anyone who's able to influence your salary, are thinking about at that time. So think about budgetary reviews and those kinds of things that may not necessarily play into your salary, but because they're thinking about money, talking about their budget for next year with their supervisors or the management, the C-suite, that might be a great time to plan it as well. And then finally, do your research. So you and I both know a lot of things are discoverable online. There's great websites out there for you to understand kind of what's the going rate for somebody with your skill set, with somebody with your number of years of experience, for somebody in a particular industry. So just make sure that you do a little bit of benchmarking to understand how that will play out. So sites like Glassdoor.com, Payscale.com are certainly useful.
We've got a couple of minutes left. Let's touch briefly on your podcast. A lot of business owners today are helping spread the message through the use of podcasting, and you can find your podcast over at workplacelab.org. But tell us a little bit about your podcast and what it does for your business.
Absolutely. Podcasting, it's funny because I want to say that it started in the 90s. I remember when iTunes had this podcast section, and a lot of us in college at the time were like, what is this podcast thing? And so now it's having sort of reintegration, as it were. So there's so many people out there who are able to connect with communities, the global marketplace with podcasts. And I certainly enjoy podcasting as well. It's this creative endeavor that I didn't necessarily know that I was really going to find a lot of joy in, but I really enjoy the amount of exposure that it gives you, right? So it gives you this direct way of being authentic with people. So the Workplace Lab blog and the podcast are geared towards being sort of an HR confidant to people, being that sort of HR best friend that you didn't know you needed, as it were. And so that's really the direction that we're taking the podcast. And we've done a number of topics, including, like we talked about, trust and negotiation. And we have quite a number of other conversations queued up with authors and experts and motivational speakers on a variety of topics: work-life balance. Mm-hmm. Excuse me, that's a hot topic right now. Motivation, bouncing back from failure, all sorts of things. So we're really excited to get the podcast up and running. We've got about 5 episodes now. You can find us on iTunes and anywhere that you get your podcast.
Now, what is the long-term goal for Workplace Lab? Where do you see your company like in 5 years?
Excellent question. We're really in growth mode right now. We want to impact as many people as we possibly can with the notion of employee advocacy, employee empowerment, and employee engagement. This is a two-way street. I know that. Employers are a huge part of that equation as well. And so as many organizations who will let us, will come and speak with them about all of these things that are touching employees. And certainly from the bottom or from the ground up, we try to get to people's issues and heal wounds to really try to help people live happier work lives in general. So, 5-10 years, we hope that Workplace Lab is a growing nonprofit that many people have heard about. We hope our podcast is helpful to people. Certainly, we hope that we're present in the global marketplace as a beacon of hope and, a nonprofit that's helping people, navigate their careers.
All right, great discussion. Ariana Robinson Danquah, president and founder of Workplace Lab. Learn more at workplacelab.org. So Ariana, thank you for being on the program today. Great discussion.
Thanks, Amy.
Absolutely. Again, workplacelab.org. New episodes of the program each weekday morning, 9 a.m., thatbusinessnetwork.com. You've been listening to That Business Show 2.0 with your host, Jamie Maloney, where business becomes show business.